Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional and a leadership guru from Utah, USA, Annie Yatch. Annie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
Thank you. Annie is the Chief Transformation Officer and founder of the Northstar Leadership School. So, Annie, before we start talking about leadership and transformation, tell me a little bit about your journey and what was the inspiration to transition from a background in counterterrorism to becoming a transformation officer.
Well, I have to tell you, I did not think that this was going to happen, but as a young, college student who is trying to keep the country safe, when I first started learning about neurochemistry and neuroscience, I was just so fascinated by watching people and learning how they work and what helps them be better.
Mm,
But when you're working in counterterrorism, you're not necessarily using those habits or those skill sets for good all the time, right? And I
right.
realized I can't lie. I am a horrible liar. And so I realized that counterterrorism wasn't the best path for me. And
Mm,
so instead, what I ended up doing was I like, how can I use these skill sets in behavior change and leadership
mm,
and transformation? How can I use them for good? And
right.
so, that's how it all began and that's how it all started.
Amazing, amazing. And how has your journey influenced your belief in the power of rewiring the subconscious for success?
Well, all I have to say is that I'm so thankful that I got into this work about 15 years ago
Hmm.
because my journey, I realized I had been sort of wired from my background with my family and growing up to believe that if you self-sacrifice, if you give up and give all to everybody else, that maybe somebody will eventually give back to you.
Mm,
So I had a subconscious pattern there
mhm.
about if I give to everybody else, then eventually something good will happen for me.
Right.
And, I lived that way for a long time. I built three businesses, I raised kids, I helped everybody I possibly could, impacted thousands of people. But at the end of the day, I was so exhausted and
Mm,
so, I would say, like not living in joy. And when I realized that, I was like, there's got to be some way to break through this.
hmm.
When I looked into the subconscious side, the subconscious runs 11 million data points a second, and the
Wow.
conscious mind only runs at 4 data points a second.
Mm,
So if you think about that, there's a huge deficit between the subconscious patterning that's running your life and the conscious brain that's your adult self.
mm,
So I started realizing, oh my goodness, almost all of us have this little 7-year-old that runs the show through our subconscious until we figure out what is that big pattern that's
mm.
been us that we haven't been able to see.
Wow. Wow. But for my viewers and listeners, can you explain in easy terms what is subconscious?
So the subconscious, if you think about it as all the parts of you that picks up data, right? So you've
Mm,
got your conscious brain, which is your adult brain that's very aware and can focus on, like when you are cooking yourself breakfast, you have to think about, okay, first I'm going to scramble the eggs, then I'm going to cook the toast. That's the conscious brain. Subconscious brain is how your whole body moves based on what you believe to be true. And
mm.
so, sometimes we've been like driving home from work and all of a sudden we're on autopilot and we don't even realize we're home. That's an example of the
Yeah.
subconscious brain
Yeah.
working for us.
Yeah.
So, the thing that really shocked me was usually, between the age of 7 and 10, sometimes it's 5 to 10,
Hmm.
we have something happen to us as a little kid.
Mm,
And we create a story from whatever happens, and we replay that story over and over again until we see what that pattern is later in life,
mm,
not even realizing that it's limiting our potential. It's limiting how much money we can make. It's limiting how well we do in life. And the only reason I can for sure tell you this is that from 15 years and thousands of clients and even
mm,
doing the work on myself,
mm,
if I hadn't identified what that pattern was, I would never have broken through the revenue ceiling that I was stuck at.
mm. Wow. Great response. Thank you. And Annie, what personal challenges have shaped your unique approach to leadership and subconscious work?
Well, I would say there are quite a few challenges. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur and you
Mm,
can't be real about the challenges, then we've
correct.
got some problems, right? But I would say some of the biggest challenges I've gone through. Back when I got engaged and married, my ex-husband now, but my husband at the time, he had been through 18 different surgeries. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had been working on my master's, interning at the State Department, sorry, at the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I had been taking care of a man in the hospital as he went through all these different surgeries. And I
Mm,
just remember at the time, how do you have that kind of energy to move from one thing to another thing to another thing and still keep a positive attitude?
mm,
And that was really when I think I started to define how I do things differently in the world. And I try to be very, positive with everything that comes at me. We're not always perfect,
yeah.
but that was a big challenge. And then going
Mm,
through a divorce, that was a big challenge too, trying
mm,
to do what's best for the kids. And,
mm,
it's also a challenge when you're coaching couples, but you're
yeah.
also going through a divorce.
Mm,
So I realized for a set period of time, I'm like, I can't coach couples in leadership if
mm,
I'm going through such a tumultuous time.
correct.
But after you go through that, you have so many lessons and so many things that you learn that
Mm,
then you're ready to go again, right? So it's amazing
mm,
how life gives you all these different challenges, but each challenge is about expanding your wisdom, expanding your awareness,
right.
expanding how you show up. So
Mm,
the challenges are really, they're really difficult, but I like to think that we are all stronger
I
because of the trauma that we go through.
absolutely, absolutely. And how do subconscious patterns form in high achievers? And why are they so difficult to detect?
Well, subconscious patterns definitely form in high achievers very early on,
Mm,
and they form typically due to our school system.
mm,
So the school system, when they want you to answer a question, you have to raise your hand first, right?
mm,
You have to ask for permission.
yeah.
And so what happens with a lot of young kids is we're socially conditioned
Mm,
to only respond when there's a stimulus. And so, if you think about the subconscious brain and the patterns that it builds, if you're in a place as a young child where you have to ask for permission or you have to wait to share yourself with the world, that can feel very limiting. And
mm,
so, even I had this one gentleman where he had been closed off in his room by his mom after getting in
mm,
a fight with his mom when he was very
mm,
young. And this little boy had decided in that moment when he was only 5 or 6 that if the door closed, that everybody on the other side of the door was dead and he was the only
mm.
person alive.
Wow.
This young man made that conscious decision when he was a little kiddo. It became a subconscious story. And then for the next 30 years of his life, he built all these businesses, but he never had a human relationship with
Amazing.
somebody. He treated
Mm,
people like robots because he thought they were all dead.
mm,
But then he came to me and he found me. He was like, well, I want to have a relationship. I want to have a lot of relationships, but I can't seem to hold a
mm,
relationship. And
mm,
we backwards engineered it all the way back to that moment when he was a little kid, when he
mm,
thought everybody around him had died.
mm.
And now he's in an amazing, thriving marriage. He's got a little girl. His business is still making millions of dollars. But
Mm.
if he hadn't done that, he wouldn't have been able to form relationships.
Wow.
He hadn't done
Wow.
that work.
Wow.
So that's just an example of how the
What an
subconscious,
amazing story. Thank you.
incredible.
Yeah. And Annie, how do you incorporate neuroscience into leadership transformation?
Well, neuroscience is tricky because most of us have neural pathways that have been developed over the past 30 to 40 years.
Mm,
So, if you're looking to change someone's leadership, you have to focus across 4 different areas.
right.
You have to change them intellectually,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, through the body somatically, and then through the neurochemistry or the neuro and using neuroscience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So on the neurochemical side, we have to calm the body to get an entrepreneur out of fight or flight in order to allow them to have a calm nervous system and
Mm-hmm.
to work through big challenges. So what I like to say is I'm like, well, if we're going to really get after these trauma patterns or improve your leadership, we
Mm-hmm.
first have to calm your nervous system,
Mm.
get you out of fight or flight. So
Yeah,
that's really where we start.
amazing. And what role does emotional intelligence play in breaking through?
Emotional intelligence is the most important skill set. So
Mm-hmm.
if you are looking to do anything in the next year of your life, it's
Mm,
all about emotional mastery.
mm.
The more you master your own emotions, the
Yeah.
more you self-regulate yourself,
Mm,
the better you are at taking on new challenges, building resilience, forming relationships, building partnerships in business. All of it comes back to
mm,
how well can you master your own emotional state.
mm. Fantastic. Thank you. Moving on, Annie, what are some of the most common blind spots you see in high performing executives?
So the most common blind spots that I find in these high performing executives are a couple. So the first one that I see is that many entrepreneurs think that their common sense
Mm-hmm.
everyone should have.
Mm,
But for entrepreneurs, common sense is actually a part of their genius
mm,
that is only customized to them. So when
mm.
I work with entrepreneurs, I will tell them, if you want your team to think like you, which is what all entrepreneurs want,
Yeah.
you actually have to identify what is your standard of excellence that
Mm-hmm.
you live by, and what is like what do you think of as common sense?
Mm,
Because those two things together, your standard of excellence and your level of common sense, that's actually the genius of the individual. And if you
mm,
can teach those two aspects to your
mm.
team will be much more proactive for you.
Right.
So that's one big piece. And then the second thing that a lot of entrepreneurs hold on to is that they have to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. Like they have to
Mm-hmm.
keep jumping back in to save their team, to help their team,
Mm-hmm.
instead of inviting the team in to problem solve with them. So
Mm.
those are two of the biggest ones that I
Yeah.
work on with
Yeah. Yeah.
entrepreneurs all the time.
Very well said. And how would you help leaders build authentic confidence from the inside out?
Authentic confidence is one of the most important things to have as a leader, as you
Mm,
know. And what I've found, the best way to do that is actually to go back into their subconscious with them and work on their connection with the younger version of themselves.
mm-hmm.
A lot of people reference this as inner child work. I think that as an adult, we get very separated from our inner child and that younger version of ourselves because that
Mm,
younger version has been scared, has been lonely, has been worried. And whenever we have a trigger in our lives, it's usually because that younger version of ourselves is really upset, but
mm.
the adult self doesn't know how to interact because we're
Right.
so. And so the first thing I'll do with all the entrepreneurs that really want to maximize their leadership and build their emotional mastery is we'll sit
Mm,
down, I'll say, okay, let's have a conversation with
right.
that little kiddo. Let's figure out what he or she needs to
Mm,
be supportive and to work with you in harmony.
mm, mm. And can you give me an example without any names, of course?
Of course, of
Mm,
course. Well, I had one gentleman, he was a big land developer, and he was a little boy, and he'd gone through a very traumatic moment as a kid where he had to protect his mom when
mm,
somebody broke into the home. And when that happened, he felt like he had to be the strong kid forever, and he couldn't show any emotions.
mm,
So when he and I did some work together, I said, well, let's have a conversation with that little boy and let's let him know that he's very loved, you have his back, that you're
mm,
sorry for everything that he's been through. And
mm,
I do this technique where you just put your hand on your heart and your hand on your stomach, and then you basically talk through to your little boy
mm,
what he needed to know. And we
mm,
did this exercise, and this gentleman literally, started tearing up. And at the end of the experience, he's like, Annie, I've never felt so happy. He's
mm,
like, I can feel that this little kid version of me is finally validated. He's
mm,
finally understanding that I've got him, he's got me, and we're going to do this as a team together.
mm.
That's the first focus point
Yeah.
to enhance leadership. It's not what everybody thinks, right? I'm
Mm,
not teaching you how to have a tougher mindset or have more resilience. I'm teaching you how to connect
correct.
internally
Mm,
so that you are working in harmony with all of the parts of yourself.
right. Right.
That's where you can be then
It's
authentic.
amazing. And it's so easy to understand every time you tell us a little anecdote or a story. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Moving on, Annie, what is the
Yes.
connection between subconscious work and financial success? Or is there any?
There is 100% a connection, at
Okay.
least from what I've seen over 15
Right.
years.
Right.
So, what I would tell you is that everyone has a story and an issue with money,
Hmm.
almost everyone. Even if
Correct.
you're making millions and millions of dollars, I worked with a
Mm,
billionaire and he had issues with money, right?
mm,
But whatever your story is about money caps you at a specific ceiling in the amount of
mm,
money that you can make. So,
mm,
to give you an example, back before I did any work on myself, I was capped at, say, 30 grand a month across all
mm,
three businesses that myself and my ex-husband were running with all of our teams. And we're like,
mm,
why can't we break through this 30 grand a month? And that doesn't seem like a lot for a lot of people, but for us, it
mm.
was a lot at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So what we realized was our nervous system was so much in fight or flight that once we calmed that nervous system and we looked at the pattern of what was
Mm,
driving us into
mm,
that fight or flight, we actually were able to calm our system enough that when we went back to our business after doing that work, we went from 30K a month to 189,000 a month
mhm,
within the 3 month time window.
mm,
So that's one indicator. But what I've noticed with a lot of other people I've worked with, I had one CEO who kept making the same $9 million mistake every 3 years. And when he found me, he's like, Annie, I want to be done making this $9 million mistake.
Mm,
What do I do so I don't do it again?
mm,
I said, well, let's look
mm,
at the pattern. Went
mm,
all the way back to when he was a little kid. And as a little kid, he felt like he always had to prove himself to his dad. And when we realized he was not doing the due diligence on
mm,
his deals because he was trying to prove himself to everybody
mm.
around
Right.
instead of doing the due diligence to make sure he was protected. So
Mm,
once we identified that gap in his deal structure, all of a sudden now he's not making the same $9 million mistake.
mm.
You're either saving yourself time and energy and money,
Yeah.
or you're making a lot more money because that pattern doesn't hold you captive anymore.
Mm. Wow. Wow. What is the key to shifting team dynamics from silent sabotage to empowered collaboration?
Well, I think that team dynamics are so fixated on, I would say, three big gaps. So what I've found is if you can work with the team on these three big gaps, then
Mm,
teams become much more collaborative and they
mhm,
work much better together. So the three gaps that I've found is number one, you have to make sure the team understands how to delegate at a much higher level
mhm.
so that the handoff of responsibility is very, very clear. And
Yep.
there's a process that I walk people through for that. Okay. So we've
Mm,
got delegation is one bucket. The other bucket is giving and receiving feedback that's
mm,
productive and supportive and connecting.
mm,
Because as you know, right, people give a lot of feedback, but the feedback is usually feeling like criticism or people get defensive. So you
mm,
lose a lot of productivity. So that giving and receiving productive feedback is the second gap that we
mm,
fill.
mm,
Last piece is teaching the team how to contingency plan together
mm,
because often only one or two people are good at planning, and most
mm.
people aren't planning for contingencies. They're planning for a perfect plan that may never
Right.
happen.
Mm,
So if we can teach people how to contingency plan, how to delegate really effectively, and how to give and receive productive feedback, now all of a sudden the whole team is working at a much higher level together.
mm. Wow. Hmm. The next question, Annie, is how can organizations reduce team conflict by working on subconscious patterns?
So, what I've done a lot with teams to reduce the
Mm,
conflict is I have taught people this concept that if you're upset with somebody else,
mm.
because there is something in you that is being triggered,
Right.
and usually your reaction is all about you trying
Mm,
to figure out you. It's not necessarily about the other person.
mm,
And so, what we talk about a lot is we think in our heads and we say, what's the story that I'm making up right now
mhm,
that's causing me to suffer?
mm,
Because if we don't know what that story is and
mm.
we don't share it with someone, we can never get to the bottom of what's going on in a conflict.
Right.
So I use that practice of giving and receiving feedback to make sure that conflict is much lower across all the
Mhm,
companies I've worked with. And
mm.
once everybody has the same language around how to give and receive feedback,
Yeah.
conflict isn't as effective. People don't
Correct.
want to be there. They want to be connected.
Correct. Correct. And what are the long-term benefits of subconscious rewiring when
Oh
it
my
comes
goodness.
to leadership resilience?
So everything that we do to build resilience as a leader starts with the subconscious.
Right.
So the more you calm your nervous system, the more you emotionally manage yourself and learn how to have higher levels of emotional intelligence,
Hmm.
the more you self-regulate. And when I mean self-regulate, it's about how do you regulate yourself emotionally, mentally,
Mm,
physically. So even if you're able to work out or do something for yourself physically, that contributes to your emotional ability to
mm,
manage yourself.
mm,
So if you're willing to do the subconscious work, it's the
mm,
fastest track to getting yourself to the most successful and profitable space in your business.
mhm,
But what I've found is that for many men that I've worked with, sometimes they deal with a lot of instability in the home front.
mhm,
And if you have that instability in the home front, you're going to have instability in your business,
mm,
even if you're not aware of it. So I try to help people have consistency across the home front and being a great partner there, and then
mm,
also being a great partner in the business. And
mm,
one of the things that I've found over the years, I have a little like a PDF that I usually give out as a free thing for people who I'm on podcasts with,
mm,
and it helps men and women understand how can I diffuse conflict like that in the home
mm.
environment or in the work environment? Because
Right.
again, conflict just eats up productivity, it eats up our ability to connect with each other. So the more work we do on the subconscious, the more effective and successful we are in our
Mm,
careers and in our marriages and our
mm.
relationships.
What a
So
great
it all
response.
starts with the subconscious.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Time for two more questions for you. how does your work influence not just business outcomes, but personal relationships as well? And give me an example in this case.
Sure. So, gosh, personal relationships, my favorite that I've worked on recently because I have a lot of people that I work
Yeah.
on with this.
Hmm.
Most people come to me because they want the business success, but we find out that there's a pattern in their subconscious that
Hmm.
is causing them an issue in their relationship. And that same pattern is causing them an issue in business.
Hmm.
So when we look at the pattern in a relationship, I just had one where I was working with a gentleman. He has a wife who isn't very supportive of him in his entrepreneurial pursuits because she's like, you keep telling me things are going to get better, they don't get better. And from his perspective, he's like, well, I need to work more so that I can, move things forward. But she
Correct.
wants him to always be, at home with the kids. And in his world, he's like, we have to figure out how we can work together as a team. And so what I used with him is we worked a lot on he has to stand up for who he is. He has
Hmm.
to use his authentic voice, which was when he was a little kid, he couldn't do that because his stepfather didn't want him to talk, didn't want him to
Hmm.
share who he was. And we just had a massive breakthrough this last session where he
Hmm.
realized I have not been standing for myself in my marriage
Hmm.
because of my past relationship with my dad.
Hmm.
And now he's starting to stand for himself, say what he wants to say, and he's realizing that that same skill set can be used in his business to get
Wow.
more of what he wants.
Hmm.
So just by identifying the pattern in the
Yeah.
subconscious plaguing his marriage,
Hmm.
we're able to extrapolate it to make him even more effective in how he leads
Hmm.
his team.
Amazing. And my last question for you, what advice would you give to leaders who feel that they've tried everything, but they're still stuck?
All right. So the advice I would give to leaders who have tried everything but feel
Mm,
like they're still stuck is I would
mm,
say, spend either some time getting on a call with me to run them through a session to help them
absolutely. Yeah.
identify what that piece is, or if they
Mm,
want to do the work on their own, look at your life and look at the areas where there is suffering.
mm,
Any place in your life where there is suffering, it's because your subconscious is telling you a lie and you are believing the lie.
mm,
So if you look at the suffering and you ask yourself, what do I want to be true instead? You can work yourself out of any lie of the
mm,
subconscious.
mm.
Now, sometimes you need some help with that,
Yeah.
but that's where you can start looking at your life, identifying where there's suffering, asking yourself, is this suffering real? And what do I want to be true instead?
Amazing.
That's the big opening that
Yeah.
allows for the breakthrough to find that
Yeah.
deeper pattern.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
to find that deep pattern that runs you. Otherwise, it's very hard to get unstuck.
Correct. Correct. And on that note, Annie, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been with you. I've always known the importance of leadership. You've highlighted how important our subconscious is to be able to really support not just our leadership goals, our dreams, but also our personal lives. I
Yes.
think you took us through a lot of details on what our subconscious can do for us. And your stories were absolutely incredible. Most people remember a point when it is associated with a story, and you gave us some great stories. Thank you
I
again
love
for speaking to
people
me,
at
and good
work.
luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.